Beneath the dense jungles and wind-swept deserts of our world lie entire cities swallowed by time, not just ruins, but entire chapters of human history waiting to be read. For centuries, archaeologists have pieced together the stories of fallen civilizations with fragments of pottery, crumbling walls, and faded inscriptions. But now, something extraordinary is happening. We're no longer just scratching the surface literally. With the power of lasers and 3D imaging, we're peeling back the Earth itself, revealing lost metropolises in stunning detail, and uncovering secrets that rewrite everything we thought we knew about the collapse of history's most advanced societies. Picture this, a Maya city, not as a handful of excavated temples, but as a sprawling, living network of streets and homes, frozen in the moment it was abandoned. Or the Indus Valley, its water systems and neighborhoods mapped with precision, showing us not just how they lived, but why they might have vanished. These aren't just scans, they're time machines, offering us a front-row seat to the final days of civilizations that shaped our world. What if everything we've been taught about these collapses is missing a crucial piece of the puzzle? For generations, historians blamed war, drought, or invasion for the fall of great cultures. But the data pouring in from these 3D scans tells a more complex story, one of intricate social systems buckling under pressure, of climate shifts interacting with human choices in ways we're only beginning to understand. Take Angkor Wat, where laser surveys revealed a vast, engineered landscape that may have been its own undoing, or the Roman Empire, where scans of buried ports hint at trade networks collapsing like dominoes. These images don't just show us ruins, they show us tipping points, moments where entire societies faced challenges eerily familiar to our own. And that's what makes this more than just an archaeological breakthrough. It's a mirror, so how does it all work? Imagine flying over a jungle canopy, firing millions of laser pulses downward. Those beams pierce through leaves, bounce off hidden structures, and return to create a map of what lies beneath, no digging required. Or picture a drone hovering over a desert, stitching together thousands of images into a 3D model so precise, you can spot a single collapsed wall under layers of sand. This is the magic of LiDAR and photogrammetry, technologies that are revolutionizing archaeology. But here's the real thrill. Every scan feels like opening a time capsule. One day, it's a lost neighborhood in Teotihuacan revealing signs of mass migration. The next, it's a buried ceremonial complex in Cambodia, suggesting a society in spiritual crisis. With each discovery, the past becomes less of a mystery and more of a conversation, one that's urgent, surprising, and deeply human. And that's exactly where our journey begins. For centuries, archaeology meant painstakingly removing layers of earth by hand, a process as destructive as it was revealing. Every trowel scrape risked damaging delicate artifacts or erasing subtle clues about how ancient people lived. But that all changed when scientists borrowed a tool from meteorology and engineering LiDAR. Originally designed to study clouds and map highways, this laser scanning technology turned out to be the perfect key for unlocking buried cities without disturbing a single grain of soil. Imagine being able to see through dense rainforest canopies or across vast deserts to map entire civilizations hidden below, all from the safety of an airplane. That's exactly what happened when researchers flew over the Maya city of Tikal, revealing a sprawling urban center 5 times larger than anyone had guessed, complete with raised highways connecting distant neighborhoods. Ground-penetrating radar takes this even deeper, sending radio waves into the earth that bounce back to outline walls, tunnels, and even ancient garbage pits. In Italy, this tech exposed a hidden amphitheater beneath the Roman Emperor Nero's villa, while in England, it showed archaeologists exactly where to dig to uncover a lost Viking settlement. But here's what's truly groundbreaking: these tools don't just find structures, they capture entire systems. A single scan can show how water flowed through an ancient city's aqueducts, where crops were planted, and how people moved through their streets. Suddenly, we're not just studying ruins, we're watching societies function in real time, centuries after they vanished. The impact goes beyond discovery. Traditional excavations could take decades to map a single palace, but LiDAR surveys cover hundreds of square miles in days. When researchers scanned Cambodia's Angkor Wat complex, they found an entire network of buried canals and roads that explained why this mighty empire may have collapsed, not from invasion, but from an over-engineered landscape that couldn't adapt to climate change. That's the real revolution. We're no longer guessing why civilizations fell. We're seeing the cracks in their foundations, the choices that led to their decline, and in some haunting cases, the warnings they left behind for us. Deep in the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, where thick vines and towering ceiba trees have concealed secrets for centuries, a technological revolution is rewriting Maya history. What archaeologists once believed were isolated temple complexes scattered across the wilderness have been revealed by LiDAR scans as something astonishing: a continuous urban sprawl of cities, suburbs, and superhighways. The scans show causeways stretching over 60 miles, connecting massive metropolises with populations rivaling modern cities. One stunning discovery was the sheer density of structures: over 60,000 previously unknown houses, palaces, and ceremonial centers hidden beneath the canopy. This wasn't just a collection of city-states. It was an interconnected civilization operating on a scale no one had imagined. The real revelation came when researchers noticed something peculiar in the 3D maps: thousands of agricultural terraces carved into hillsides, intricate irrigation channels, and vast areas of drained wetlands. The Maya hadn't just lived in the jungle, they had transformed it into an engineered landscape capable of feeding millions. But here's the twist: their greatest strength may have sealed their fate. As population growth surged, the LiDAR data shows forests being cleared at an alarming rate. The scans capture the telltale signs of erosion in later layers, with sediment clogging those carefully built canals. Then the droughts came. By overlaying climate records with the 3D city maps, scientists can now pinpoint the exact century when the system began to collapse, when the very infrastructure designed to sustain the civilization became its Achilles heel. Perhaps most haunting are the scans of Tukul's reservoirs. These massive water tanks, big enough to supply the city for 18 months, sit empty in the final layers of LiDAR data. We can see where desperate engineers tried digging them deeper as water levels dropped, but the walls eventually crumbled. Meanwhile, the scans reveal something even more telling. The elite districts expanded during this crisis, their monuments growing taller as the population shrank. It's all there in the data: a society fracturing under pressure, with the gap between rulers and citizens widening as resources dwindled. What makes the Maya case so compelling isn't just the scale of their achievements or the tragedy of their decline. It's how vividly these scans capture a civilization responding to challenges we recognize today: climate shifts, resource strain, social inequality. The LiDAR doesn't just show ruins. It shows choices. Every terraced field, every diverted river, every widened plaza tells us how the Maya adapted until they couldn't. And that may be the most valuable lesson of all: not how they fell, but how long they found ways to endure. As more scans peel back layers across Central America, each new map adds another piece to this epic story of resilience and reinvention, written not in stone, but in the very shape of the land itself. While the Maya built towering pyramids in the jungle halfway across the world, another ancient civilization was perfecting urban living in ways that still astonish engineers today. The Indus Valley people, thriving over 4,000 years ago, designed cities with grid-like streets, standardized bricks, and something almost unheard of in the ancient world: indoor plumbing. Recent ground-penetrating radar surveys have peeled back the layers of time to reveal just how sophisticated these systems really were. Imagine an entire city where every house had its own bathing area, connected to a network of underground drains that could rival modern sewer systems. These scans showed channels precisely angled to keep wastewater flowing, with manholes placed at regular intervals for maintenance. This wasn't just advanced for its time, it was centuries ahead of anything seen in contemporary Mesopotamia or Egypt. What makes these discoveries even more remarkable is what they tell us about the civilization's downfall. For decades, historians pointed to invading armies as the likely culprit behind the Indus Valley's collapse. But the radar data paints a different picture. Detailed 3D maps of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa show no signs of mass violence, no burned buildings, no weapons piled in streets. Instead, the scans reveal something subtler but equally devastating. Layers of sediment show where rivers abruptly changed course, leaving entire neighborhoods stranded without water. Other areas show wells dug deeper and deeper over time, a silent testament to prolonged droughts. The most telling clue: the radar detected salt deposits in the soil, evidence that rising groundwater turned fertile fields barren as the climate shifted. Perhaps the most poignant discovery comes from the scans of the Great Bath, the civilization's most iconic structure. The radar revealed an intricate system of pipes and drains beneath it, designed to keep the sacred pool filled with fresh water. But in the final layers, the scans show the pipes clogged with silt, then abandoned. It's as if we're watching the moment when maintaining this engineering marvel became impossible, not because of war, but because the environment they depended on was slipping away. These findings do more than rewrite history books. They give us a blueprint of how societies respond to environmental stress. The Indus Valley people didn't just disappear overnight. The scans show neighborhoods gradually shrinking, new buildings constructed with lower quality materials, and public works left unfinished. It's a slow unraveling captured in the soil, telling a story of adaptation and resilience until the very end. And that might be their greatest legacy, not just their astonishing engineering, but the quiet dignity with which they faced their changing world. As more sites are scanned across Pakistan and India, each new dataset adds another piece to this 4,000-year-old puzzle, reminding us that the past never really fades, it just waits beneath our feet to be rediscovered. From the air, Angkor Wat's towering spires still take your breath away, but it's what lies beneath the surrounding jungle that tells the real story of the Khmer Empire's rise and fall. Recent LiDAR scans have peeled back centuries of overgrowth to reveal an astonishing feat of engineering: a vast, intricate network of canals, reservoirs, and moats stretching over 400 square miles. This wasn't just a city, it was a hydraulic masterpiece, a civilization that turned water into power. The scans show barrays, or giant reservoirs, capable of holding billions of gallons, feeding an elaborate grid of irrigation channels that turn the landscape into a fertile breadbasket. At its peak, this system supported a population nearing 1 million people, making Angkor one of the largest pre-industrial cities on Earth. But the same scans also expose the empire's fragile underpinnings. In stunning detail, the 3D maps reveal where canals silted up, where reservoirs cracked under pressure, and where the system began to unravel. One critical discovery was the evidence of catastrophic failures in the empire's final century: collapsed dams, breached embankments, and canals redirected in desperate attempts to keep water flowing. Climate records from tree rings tell part of the story, a series of punishing droughts that stretched for decades. Yet the scans suggest the Khmer's own ingenuity may have accelerated their decline. The LiDAR data shows how their massive water projects designed to control nature ultimately made them more vulnerable to its whims. The most haunting revelation lies in the scans of Angkor's urban sprawl. As the water system faltered, the data shows neighborhoods shrinking, temples left unfinished, and elites building ever higher walls around their compounds. In the empire's last decades, the LiDAR captures a telling pattern: new canals dug straight to the palaces, diverting water from the fields that fed the people. It's a pattern we've seen before, a society straining under environmental stress, where the powerful prioritize their own survival over the collective good. What makes Angkor's story so compelling isn't just the scale of its collapse, but the parallels to our own age of climate uncertainty. The Khmer didn't vanish overnight. The scans show generations of adaptation, smaller harvests, abandoned suburbs, a gradual retreat from grandeur. Their legacy isn't just a warning about infrastructure pushed to its limits, but a testament to human resilience in the face of forces beyond any empire's control. As archaeologists continue to scan the Cambodian landscape, each new dataset peels back another layer of this cautionary tale, written not in stone, but in the ebb and flow of water across a vanishing civilization. Pompeii's tragic end has been frozen in time for nearly 2,000 years. Its ashen streets and plaster cast victims, offering a visceral glimpse into ancient catastrophe. But beneath the well-preserved ruins, something unexpected is coming to light. The city wasn't just thriving one day and buried the next. Cutting-edge 3D scans are peeling back layers of history to reveal a society already straining under invisible pressures long before Vesuvius erupted. Take the haunting scans of a bakery uncovered near the city's edge. At first glance, it looks like any other Roman workshop: stone mills, ovens, storage rooms. But look closer, and the digital reconstruction tells a darker story. The scans show where grain sacks were replaced with cheaper fillers, where ovens were patched with mismatched bricks, and where the living quarters shrank as workers crammed into smaller spaces. These aren't just signs of poverty, they're fingerprints of an economy in decline. Even more revealing are the scans of Pompeii's grand villas. While their frescoed walls still dazzle, the 3D models expose subtle clues of a society fracturing. Some homes show hastily added locks and reinforced doors, while others reveal hidden staircases, architectural whispers of a populace growing uneasy. One particularly striking scan captures a luxurious house with its dining room converted into a makeshift workshop, its fine mosaics scratched by tools. This wasn't just redecorating, it was desperation. The wealthy were no longer entertaining guests, they were manufacturing goods to survive. Then there's the water system. Detailed laser scans of Pompeii's aqueducts and pipes show something startling: entire neighborhoods where repairs were abandoned mid-project. The digital models map out cracks that went unfixed and lead pipes that were stolen, likely melted down for quick cash. At the same time, scans of the city's public fountains reveal where water flow was redirected to privileged districts, leaving others to dig private wells. The message in the data is clear: Pompeii's infrastructure was crumbling long before the volcano did. What makes these discoveries so powerful isn't just the technology, it's the human story they tell. The scans don't show a city frozen at its peak, as the ash might suggest. They show a community grappling with economic strain, inequality, and environmental stress, a mirror to challenges we know all too well. And that's the real warning etched into these digital reconstructions. Disasters don't happen in a vacuum. They strike societies already weathering their own storms. Pompeii's final moments were dramatic, but its unraveling was gradual, a lesson written not in lava, but in the quiet details of everyday life, now visible for the first time in centuries. The same soil that once nourished the world's first cities may have also sealed their fate. In the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, where writing and agriculture were born, 3D scans of buried ruins tell a story of slow-motion disaster. Ground-penetrating radar has mapped vast fields around and Uruk, revealing not just the outlines of forgotten farms, but the toxic legacy beneath them, layers of salt accumulating over centuries, poisoning the land that fed empires. The scans show irrigation canals still perfectly preserved, their walls stained white with mineral deposits. These weren't engineering failures, they were unintended consequences of success. The same water systems that turned deserts into bread baskets gradually concentrated salts in the soil, until crops withered in the fields that had once made Mesopotamia the envy of the world. What makes these findings so startling is the precision with which we can now trace the collapse. By combining soil samples with 3D models of ancient fields, researchers can pinpoint the exact decades when harvests began to fail. The scans show farmers desperately digging new canals to bypass salted earth, then abandoning entire tracts of land as the crisis spread. In one haunting example, radar images of a temple complex near Lhasa reveal where priests switched from offering barley to less nutritious dates, a silent admission that even the gods were getting second-rate rations. But Mesopotamia isn't alone. Half a world away, LiDAR scans of the Andes expose a different kind of environmental reckoning. The ancient Tiwanaku civilization built raised fields in Lake Titicaca's marshes, creating microclimates to protect crops from frost. The 3D maps show this system working perfectly until a prolonged drought dropped water levels, leaving the intricate network of canals high and dry. The scans capture farmers' frantic attempts to adapt, extending channels toward retreating shorelines, then finally abandoning them when the rains never returned. Perhaps the most sobering insight from all this data isn't just that climates changed, but how societies responded, or failed to. In the Indus Valley, scans show cities relocating as rivers shifted. In the Maya lowlands, they reveal terraces built to combat erosion. Some cultures adapted for generations before faltering, others collapsed abruptly when key systems failed. What unites them all is the stark lesson written in the scans. No matter how advanced a civilization becomes, its fate remains tied to the land that sustains it. And that's what makes these digital time capsules so valuable. They don't just show us the past, they show us patterns, warning signs, and sometimes the moment when ingenuity simply wasn't enough. Mohenjo-Daro's perfectly aligned streets and advanced drainage systems, captured in stunning 3D detail, look like they were designed yesterday, not 4,000 years ago. These scans reveal a city planned with almost mathematical precision, where every brick matched a standard size and every neighborhood connected to an underground sewer network. At first glance, this level of organization suggests unshakable stability, but the same scans that showcase their brilliance also expose their fragility. Those meticulously laid grids show no evidence of expansion or adaptation over centuries. When climate shifts altered river courses or trade routes faltered, this civilization had engineered itself into a corner every street, every canal locked into place with no room to pivot. Compare this to the organic sprawl of ancient Rome, visible in ground-penetrating radar surveys of Ostia's port. The scans show haphazard warehouses added where needed, roads bending around obstacles, and entire districts repurposed as Rome's economy shifted. This messy adaptability gave them resilience when grain shipments from Egypt stalled. They turned to North Africa. When the Tiber flooded, they rebuilt higher. The contrast couldn't be sharper. One civilization prized perfect order, the other embraced flexible chaos. Neither approach guaranteed survival, but the scans show us which strategy bought more time when crises hit. Modern planners are taking notes. When researchers superimposed Mohenjo-Daro's grid onto flood models, they found its rigid alignment placed critical infrastructure in predictable danger zones. Today's cities like Copenhagen now use similar 3D modeling to test designs against rising sea levels, not for permanence but for change. The ancient city's scans serve as both inspiration and warning. Brilliant engineering isn't enough if it can't bend. Perhaps the most telling discovery comes from the Indus Valley's later layers. As trade collapsed, scans show residents knocking holes in those perfect walls to create makeshift shops, filling elegant baths with rubble to make foundations for new homes. In their final days, they abandoned the blueprint that had defined them not out of failure, but as a last act of ingenuity. Their greatest lesson wasn't in how they built, but in how they finally chose to break the rules. Beneath the Mediterranean's shimmering surface, 3D scans of ancient shipwrecks tell a story far richer than sunken treasure. These digital reconstructions map out cargo holds still packed with amphorae, containers that once carried olive oil from Spain, wine from Greece, and grain from Egypt. The patterns are unmistakable, trade routes stretching thousands of miles, binding empires together in a delicate web of mutual dependence. Now imagine one thread snapping. Scans of a Roman port near Naples reveal dockside warehouses stacked high with imported goods until suddenly they're not. The 3D models show layers where shipments grew sporadic, then stopped altogether. Broken amphorae litter the seafloor, their contents spilled in what archaeologists now recognize as economic collapse frozen in time. The real revelation comes when you overlay these maritime scans with land surveys. At Petra, laser mapping of the Nabatean capital shows caravanserai desert inns for traders slowly emptying as routes shifted. Meanwhile, ground-penetrating radar in Palmyra exposes a marketplace that once buzzed with Silk Road commerce, now showing stalls repurposed for local crafts as long-distance trade withered. These weren't isolated events. The scans captured domino effects. A drought in North Africa meant less grain for Rome, which meant fewer coins for Syrian glassmakers, which meant empty stalls in Indian ports that relied on those luxury exports. Perhaps most striking are the scans of Rome's frontier outposts. At Vindolanda along Hadrian's Wall, 3D models of military storerooms show where imported foods gave way to local substitutes, Germanic beer replacing Italian wine, coarse barley bread standing in for Egyptian wheat. The empire didn't just lose supplies, it lost the cultural glue that held its provinces together. What's astonishing is how clearly the technology captures this unraveling. One particular scan near the Danube shows a Roman fort's granary with its flooring, raised a desperate attempt to protect dwindling reserves from rising dampness. It's a small detail that speaks volumes. Even the mighty empire was reduced to reactive survival tactics when its economic lifelines frayed. These findings force us to rethink what makes civilizations resilient. The Maya and Khmer faced environmental crises, but trade-dependent societies faced a different vulnerability: the collapse of trust networks spanning continents. A 3D reconstruction of Constantinople's medieval docks shows ships from a dozen nations moored side by side. When political chaos made those waters unsafe, the scans reveal something poignant. Merchants began building smaller, faster boats not for wealth but for survival. The lesson etched into these digital maps isn't just about economics, it's about how interconnectedness, humanity's greatest strength, can also be its Achilles heel when systems fail. And in an age of global supply chains and digital markets, that's a warning written not in ancient ledgers, but in the very shape of abandoned harbors and silent market squares. The towering walls of Hattusa, capital of the mighty Hittite Empire, weren't just stone and mortar, they were a statement, stretching over 6 miles, studded with gates guarded by stone lions. These fortifications told the world this was a civilization not to be trifled with. But recent 3D scans of those same walls reveal a darker story etched into their very foundations. Laser mapping shows layers of hasty repairs, sections rebuilt thinner with poorer materials, and entire stretches left broken after attacks. These aren't just battle scars, they're the fingerprints of an empire slowly bleeding out. What makes these digital reconstructions so revealing is how they capture the rhythm of collapse. In one scan, you can see where the Hittites reinforced their gates after an Assyrian assault, only for the next layer to show those reinforcements shattered by a fresh invasion. Ground-penetrating radar exposes pits filled with arrowheads outside the walls, while LiDAR surveys map out siege camps encircling the city, not once but repeatedly over decades. The data paints a picture of a society trapped in a vicious cycle. Each attack weakened their ability to defend against the next, until finally, the scans show the unthinkable abandoned guard towers, breached gates left unrepaired, and the eerie quiet of a capital that simply stopped fighting back. But here's where the technology gets truly insightful. By simulating these battles in 3D, researchers noticed something textbooks missed. The Hittites didn't fall to a single overwhelming force. Their collapse came from death by 1,000 cuts raids chipping away at trade routes, vassal states peeling off one by one until the empire's core was left isolated. Digital terrain models show how invading armies exploited drought-weakened regions, targeting granaries visible in scans as hollowed-out silos. In one chilling reconstruction, you can virtually stand on the walls as attackers swarm through a section left undermanned, likely because the Hittites had stretched their forces too thin, putting down rebellions elsewhere. The parallels to modern instability are hard to ignore. Just as scans of Hittite border forts show garrisons gradually shrinking, satellite imagery today reveals abandoned outposts in conflict zones worldwide. And like the Hittites, many modern societies face threats that don't come in one decisive blow, but in waves of smaller crises that erode resilience over time. There's a lesson in those layered scans. Collapse rarely happens in a single dramatic moment. More often, it's the slow accumulation of unchecked pressures, military, economic, environmental, that finally pushes a society past its breaking point. Perhaps the most poignant discovery comes from scans of Hattusa's final days. Buried under later settlements, the 3D models show where residents tore down palace stones to build crude shelters, repurposing the symbols of their former power into mere survival tools. It's a haunting reminder that even the mightiest empires don't vanish, they transform, degrade, and ultimately become raw material for whatever comes next. As researchers continue scanning battle sites from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, each new dataset adds another chapter to humanity's oldest story, the rise and fall of civilizations that believed their walls would stand forever. High above the ruins of Teotihuacan, LiDAR scans reveal more than just the geometry of ancient pyramids. They capture moments of spiritual crisis frozen in architectural time. The data shows something startling, layers of ceremonial activity abruptly shifting in the century before the city's fall. Where once the Great Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent saw meticulous offerings of jade and obsidian, later scans expose hasty, improvised rituals, animal bones piled carelessly, altars built from rubble, even sacred spaces repurposed for mundane storage. These aren't just changes in worship, they're distress signals carved into stone. What makes these findings so revealing is how they mirror other sites worldwide. In Cambodia, 3D models of Angkor Wat's lesser temples show where intricate Hindu carvings were roughly chiseled away to make room for Buddhist iconography, not as a gradual evolution, but in frantic bursts during periods of drought and political turmoil. Ground-penetrating radar at Egypt's Karnak temple detects where processional routes were suddenly redirected, bypassing traditional stations as if the old rituals no longer held power. In every case, the technology captures a pattern. When environmental or social pressures mounted, spiritual practices didn't just adapt, they fractured. The most poignant evidence comes from scans of Teotihuacan Street of the Dead. Detailed laser maps show where the city's carefully aligned astronomical markers were gradually ignored. Later constructions cut across sacred sightlines as if the connection between Earth and cosmos, the very foundation of their belief system, had been severed. Even more telling are the scans of residential compounds where household shrines were bricked up or converted to storage. When faith unravels at the family level, it suggests more than theological change. It hints at a society losing its shared language of meaning. But here's what the data clarifies that written records never could. These shifts weren't uniform. While some temples fell into neglect, others saw frenzied activity. LiDAR scans at Kapon reveal a Maya royal palace suddenly surrounded by hundreds of ritual pits, desperate offerings dug during a prolonged drought. The 3D models show where later pits cut through earlier ones, a chaotic stacking of pleas to the gods. At the same time, the scans expose elite compounds walling themselves off, their private altars growing more elaborate as public ceremonies dwindled. The message is clear: when shared beliefs fracture, inequality fills the void. These digital reconstructions do more than document collapse, they expose its human dimension. In the scans of Göbekli Tepe, we see where ancient builders carefully buried their sacred pillars under tons of earth, not as destruction, but as a deliberate act of preservation. At Cahokia's mounds, ground-penetrating radar reveals layers of ceremonial objects placed in precise alignment, even as the city emptied. These weren't societies giving up. They were communities trying to save what mattered most as their world changed around them. The real lesson isn't that faith failed them, it's that in their final chapters, it may have been the last thread holding them together. The scans of Cahokia's residential districts tell a story modern city planners would recognize instantly: a boomtown pushed past its limits. High-resolution 3D models reveal neighborhoods that once thrived with spacious homes and communal plazas gradually transforming into cramped, haphazard settlements. Ground-penetrating radar exposes layers where trash pits encroached on living spaces, and what began as orderly streets became tangled alleyways as families partitioned courtyards into ever smaller dwellings. But the most damning evidence lies beneath the surface. Scans of the city's once advanced sanitation system show cesspits overflowing into drinking water wells, while soil analysis reveals parasites multiplying in the very earth where children played. This wasn't just growth, it was a society consuming itself from within. What makes Cahokia's case so striking is how clearly the scans capture the domino effect of density. LiDAR maps show the city's famous mounds centers of political and spiritual life, increasingly isolated as slums sprawled around them. At the same time, 3D reconstructions of food storage pits show alarming shifts, where early layers contain diverse crops like maize, squash, and sunflower seeds. Later deposits hold mostly corn, a sign of overworked fields losing biodiversity. The data paints an inescapable picture. Every additional resident strained the systems that made urban life possible. Even Cahokia's grand wooden palisade, visible in scans as a massive defensive wall, became a paradox. Built to protect against external threats, Its construction required felling thousands of trees, accelerating the deforestation that may have worsened floods and soil erosion. Parallel patterns emerge across the ancient world. In Roman Austria, scans of apartment buildings show single-family homes subdivided into tiny flats, with staircases added awkwardly to accommodate new tenants. At Mesopotamia's ground-penetrating radar reveals elite districts expanding upward multi-story mansions, literally rising above the squalor, while scans of workers' quarters show walls thinning as materials grew scarce. These weren't just cities getting bigger, they were social contracts fraying under demographic pressure. Perhaps the most sobering insight comes from comparing these ancient scans with modern urban surveys. The same signatures of strain, declining air quality in soil samples, shrinking green spaces in LiDAR maps, falling nutritional diversity in waste deposits mirror challenges faced by today's megacities. Cahokia's leaders likely never imagined their thriving metropolis could collapse from its own success, yet the scans show their fate wasn't inevitable. Buried in the data are glimpses of alternatives, neighborhoods that resisted overcrowding through strict zoning, wells relocated before contamination spread, even attempts at vertical farming. These weren't enough to save the city, but they whisper a crucial truth: collapse isn't about numbers alone, but about how societies choose to manage them. As our own cities swell, these digital echoes from the past offer more than warnings. They provide case studies written in the very soil we now know how to read. Scattered across Easter Island's now barren landscape, 3D scans of ancient fields reveal grooves where crops once grew, straight lines suddenly turning chaotic, then vanishing altogether. These aren't just abandoned farms, they're the fingerprints of a civilization eating itself alive. LiDAR surveys show how generations of Rapa Nui farmers cleared forests to plant gardens, unaware they were stripping the island of its very skin. With each tree felled, the scans exposed topsoil washing away, leaving behind skeletal fields where crops grew stunted, then failed entirely. But the real tragedy lies in the storage pits. Ground-penetrating radar uncovers underground chambers designed to hold yams and taro, early layers packed full, later ones nearly empty, and finally pits repurposed as graves. This pattern repeats across the ancient world with eerie consistency. In the American Southwest, scans of ancestral Puebloan granaries show corn cobs shrinking over generations as drought parched the land. At Mesopotamia's 3D models of temple storehouses track a grim progression, from stacks of grain baskets to jars of salted fish, then to clay tablets recording desperate loans, food as currency in a starving city. What makes these images so powerful isn't just the evidence of hunger, but the visible attempts to adapt. On Easter Island, the scans capture farmers building elaborate stone enclosures to shield crops from wind, then terracing hillsides as fertile valleys turn to dust. In the Maya lowlands, LiDAR reveals canals repurposed as last-ditch irrigation when rains failed, their muddy bottoms still bearing the scrape marks of digging sticks. Perhaps most haunting are the scans of storage systems pushed to their limits. In the Andes, 3D reconstructions of Inca Colca's elevated grain stores designed to prevent rot show later chambers filled with toxic mold, a sign of damp desperation as climate shifted. At Çatalhöyük, one of the world's first cities, ground-penetrating radar exposes households hoarding grain beneath their floors, even as communal silos stood empty. This shift from collective survival to every family for themselves marks a turning point in the scans, the moment when trust fractured along with the food supply. What these images teach us goes far beyond ancient history. Modern satellite surveys of California's Central Valley show nearly identical patterns to those found in Mesopotamia, water tables dropping as fields are overworked, leaving salt deposits that shimmer in the data like ancient warnings. The real value of these 3D time capsules isn't just in documenting collapse, but in capturing the precise mechanisms of failure. We can see where crop rotations were skipped, where forests were cut faster than they regrew, where short-term gains trumped long-term survival. And in that data lies an uncomfortable truth. Starvation rarely comes from single bad harvests. It's the culmination of choices, small compromises with nature that add up until the land has nothing left to give. The most sobering insight comes not from empty storehouses, but from what people did when the food ran out. Scans of Easter Island's later settlements show ovens adapted to cook smaller, tougher meals, palm roots pounded into paste, seabird bones ground for marrow. In the Roman port of Ostia, 3D models of tavern kitchens reveal grain fillers like chaff and sawdust mixed into bread. These weren't just signs of hunger, they were acts of ingenuity in the face of irreversible change. That's the paradox these scans lay bare. Collapse isn't an event, but a process, one where societies often fight creatively to the very end, even as the earth beneath them turns to dust. Beneath the streets of ancient Constantinople, ground-penetrating radar has revealed rows of shallow graves stacked 5 bodies deep, silent witnesses to a catastrophe that swept through the city like wildfire. These aren't random burials. The 3D scans show careful organization at first, with bodies wrapped in linen and placed head to toe, then later layers descending into chaos, skeletons tossed haphazardly, limbs tangled in haste. This grim progression matches historical accounts of the Justinian plague, which ravaged the Byzantine Empire in the 6th century. But the scans add something textbooks never could: physical proof of how quickly a civilization's social fabric can unravel when disease strikes. The same technology is rewriting our understanding of other epidemics. In Rome's port city of Ostia, LiDAR maps expose entire blocks abandoned mid-construction, their half-built walls left to crumble as workers succumb to an unidentified outbreak. Soil analysis from these sites tells an even darker story: traces of lead and mercury, evidence of desperate medical remedies that may have poisoned more than they cured. Meanwhile, in the Maya city of Tikal, scans of water reservoirs show where rulers tried sealing them off during droughts, unintentionally creating breeding grounds for malaria-carrying mosquitoes. The irony is heartbreaking. Their attempts to stave off one crisis accelerated another. What makes these discoveries so chilling isn't just the scale of suffering they reveal, but the patterns that emerge across civilizations. In London, radar scans of medieval plague pits show how the Black Death disproportionately targeted slums, their cramped conditions visible in the density of bones. At the same time, 3D models of wealthy neighborhoods reveal private chapels built during the outbreak, suggesting the elite barricaded themselves away. It's a dynamic we recognize today. Pandemics don't just kill, they expose and amplify inequality. Perhaps the most sobering insight comes from comparing these ancient outbreaks. Scans of Egyptian burial sites near Amarna show evidence of a tuberculosis epidemic coinciding with the reign of Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who upended traditional religion. The timing is provocative. Was his radical monotheism a response to divine abandonment during disease? Similarly, in the abandoned ancestral Puebloan villages of the American Southwest, scans reveal corn stores left untouched, suggesting spiritual taboos prevented the starving from eating reserves. Disease didn't just claim lives, it shattered belief systems. Yet these scans also uncover resilience. In Roman Britain, 3D models of a military hospital near Hadrian's Wall show innovative quarantine wards added during outbreaks. At Angkor Wat, LiDAR reveals how Khmer engineers rerouted water to cleanse disease-ridden neighborhoods. Even in devastation, societies fought back with creativity. That's the real lesson etched into these digital reconstructions. Collapse isn't inevitable. It's the moment when challenges outpace adaptation. As we confront our own global health threats, these ancient battlegrounds offer more than warnings. They provide case studies in human tenacity, written in the bones of the past and now, for the first time, fully visible. Buried beneath layers of volcanic ash in the ancient city of Akrotiri, 3D scans of a Bronze Age workshop tell a silent story of innovation grinding to a halt. The laser maps reveal tools left exactly where workers dropped them: bronze chisels worn down to nubs, stone molds cracked from overuse, and half-finished pottery stacked in rows. But what's truly revealing is what's missing. Over decades of occupation, the scans show no new tool designs, no improvements in furnace technology, and no adaptation to the volcanic soils that made farming increasingly difficult. This wasn't just a pause in progress, it was a society clinging to methods that no longer served them, even as the ground literally trembled beneath their feet. The pattern repeats across the ancient world with eerie consistency. In Egypt's Fayum oasis, ground-penetrating radar has mapped out irrigation tools from the late New Kingdom period: shovels and plows identical to those used centuries earlier, despite clear evidence in soil scans that the Nile's floods were becoming unpredictable. Nearby, 3D models of weaving workshops show looms unchanged for generations, even as textile fragments reveal a shift to coarser, quicker to produce fabrics. The message in the data is unmistakable. When faced with mounting pressures, these cultures doubled down on tradition rather than innovating their way out of crisis. Perhaps the most striking example comes from scans of Mycenaean metalworking quarters. Early layers show a vibrant trade in advanced alloys, with crucibles designed to reach precise temperatures for mixing copper and tin. But in the century before the civilization's collapse, the 3D models reveal a disturbing trend: artisans recycling old bronze into inferior mixtures, patching broken tools instead of crafting new ones, and eventually abandoning metallurgy altogether. Soil analysis tells the rest of the story. As tin imports dried up due to disrupted trade routes, the Mycenaeans didn't pivot to new technologies. They simply did less with less until doing anything became impossible. This technological stagnation wasn't always a choice. Scans of Rapa Nui's stone quarries show how deforestation left islanders without the logs needed to transport their iconic moai statues. But instead of developing alternative methods, the 3D maps reveal increasingly frantic and futile attempts to keep using the old techniques. Deep grooves in the rock show where teams tried dragging smaller statues with thinner ropes, wearing tracks into the volcanic stone through sheer repetition. It's a heartbreaking snapshot of a society trapped by its own expertise, unable to imagine a different way forward even as the old ways failed them. What makes these findings so relevant today is the universal human tendency they expose. Scans of medieval European ironworks show the same pattern during the Little Ice Age forges, using outdated bellows technology despite clear evidence of failing crops that demanded better tools. The uncomfortable truth hidden in these digital reconstructions isn't just that civilizations fall when they stop innovating. It's that the very things which once made them successful, standardized processes, specialized labor, cultural pride in craftsmanship, can become obstacles to change when circumstances shift. Yet the scans also offer glimmers of hope. In the Indus Valley, researchers found one neighborhood where technological adaptation flourished even as the wider civilization declined. 3D models of their workshops reveal ceramic filters for purifying water, compact multi-crop farming tools, and lightweight roofing materials better suited to the region's changing rainfall. These weren't grand inventions, they were practical, localized solutions that bought precious time. That distinction may hold the key to understanding collapse not as a failure of imagination, but as a mismatch between the scale of challenges and the flexibility of response. As we confront our own era of climate shifts and social upheaval, these ancient workshops serve as both warning and inspiration. The scans don't show societies that were incapable of change, but ones that waited too long to redirect their ingenuity. Perhaps that's the most valuable lesson etched into these digital time capsules. Progress isn't just about advancing. It's about adapting, especially when every instinct says to hold tight to what worked before. Laser scans of Mesopotamian palaces reveal floors inlaid with lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and cedar beams imported from Lebanon, luxuries that would have required entire trade networks to sustain. Meanwhile, just a few hundred yards away, ground-penetrating radar exposes cramped mud-brick dwellings where families slept shoulder to shoulder on reed mats. The contrast couldn't be starker. 3D models show elite districts expanding upward with multiple stories and private courtyards, while commoner neighborhoods sprawled outward in haphazard, flimsy constructions. At the ziggurat of scans capture something even more telling: the sheer volume of labor invested in elevating priests and rulers literally above the populace. The structure's foundation layers contain enough bricks to build a wall around the entire city, all baked in kilns that would have consumed forests worth of fuel. This pattern of elite overreach repeats across civilizations with unsettling clarity. In the Khmer Empire, LiDAR maps show Angkor's royal precincts surrounded by moats wider than football fields, while scans of outlying villages reveal irrigation canals clogged with silt, a disparity that grew stark during droughts. Similarly, 3D reconstructions of Teotihuacan's Street of the Dead expose a chilling detail. The avenue's perfect alignment with celestial events required demolishing entire working-class neighborhoods to maintain its sacred geometry. The scans don't just show inequality, they quantify it. Soil analysis from Roman insulae apartments traces lead poisoning from cheap plumbing in the lower floors, while upper-level scans reveal marble veneers and heated floors for the wealthy. What makes these visualizations so powerful is how they capture inequality's corrosive effects over time. At Cahokia, scans of elite mounds show successive layers of extravagant burials, copper ornaments, shell beads, and sacrificial victims, while surrounding residential areas exhibit rising malnutrition in bone density scans. Then comes the turning point. Ground-penetrating radar detects burned layers in administrative buildings, followed by the abrupt abandonment of elite compounds. The message in the data is clear: when survival becomes a struggle for the many while the few hoard resources, social contracts shatter. Perhaps the most revealing examples come from places where elites attempted course correction too late. In the Indus Valley, scans of Mohenjo-Daro's later periods show elite walls being deliberately thinned to share bricks with commoners, a gesture undermined by 3D models revealing hidden storerooms still packed with grain. Similarly, Mycenaean palace archives digitized from clay tablets show desperate wage increases for workers, even as scans of workshops prove those promises went unfulfilled. These weren't just unequal societies, they were systems where privilege became so entrenched that even well-intentioned reforms couldn't stave off collapse. The haunting lesson from these scans isn't that inequality destroys civilizations, it's how. The data shows tipping points where resentment turned to unrest. Maya citadels with hastily built barricades facing inward toward plazas, Roman villas with wells poisoned during revolts, and Egyptian storehouses where accounting marks transition from orderly inventories to chaotic tallies of looted goods. What begins as a gap in resources ends as a collapse of trust, and once that happens, no amount of monument building can glue a society back together. As our own cities generate digital footprints future archaeologists might one day scan, these ancient divides serve as more than history. They're mirrors reflecting the perennial cost of letting walls grow taller between those who have too much and those who don't have enough. The ground beneath the Minoan civilization didn't just shake, it vanished. Recent underwater scans of Santorini's caldera reveal the sheer scale of catastrophe that struck this advanced society over 3,000 years ago. The 3D maps show cliffs sheared away in an instant, entire coastal settlements swallowed by tsunamis, and layers of ash so thick they buried towns in a single afternoon. But what's truly chilling isn't the destruction itself, it's how little warning they had. Core samples taken from the seabed and reconstructed digitally show no gradual buildup of seismic activity. One day, the Earth simply tore open, unleashing a force equivalent to 40 atomic bombs. The scans capture the aftermath in heartbreaking detail. Pottery kilns filled with half-fired vessels, gold rings melted into bizarre shapes by the heat, and stairways leading nowhere where upper floors were blasted into the sky. Yet Santorini isn't alone in this story of natural annihilation. Along the coast of ancient Crete, ground-penetrating radar has uncovered Minoan harbor towns buried under 30 feet of tsunami debris, a grim counterpart to the volcanic ash layers on Santorini. The 3D models show how successive waves pushed ships inland like toys, smashing them against second-story walls. But perhaps the most telling discovery comes from the scans of storage complexes. Unlike other collapsing civilizations where food shortages show gradual decline, these warehouses were packed to the ceilings when disaster hit. The Minoans weren't failing, they were thriving one moment and erased the next. Half a world away, LiDAR surveys tell a similar tale at the Maya city of Serene, often called the Pompeii of the Americas. Here, a volcanic eruption buried a farming community so rapidly that scans reveal meals left on tables and footprints frozen in ash. The level of preservation is staggering. 3D reconstructions show woven baskets still holding chili peppers, sleeping mats indented by bodies that never returned, and even the furrows of recently plowed fields. Unlike political collapses or environmental mismanagement, these disasters left no time for adaptation or blame. They're snapshots of ordinary life interrupted, reminding us that for all humanity's achievements, nature holds the final card. What makes these scans so valuable isn't just their record of destruction, but their evidence of resilience. At the ancient Greek city of Hittite, long thought to be a mythical Atlantis-like settlement lost to the sea, underwater radar located its ruins buried under coastal sediment. The detailed maps show how survivors attempted to rebuild directly atop the drowned city, only to be hit by a second earthquake years later. Similarly, in Japan, 3D models of the Jomon civilization's coastal villages reveal generations of communities rebuilding in the same tsunami-prone bays, their middens layered like geological courage. These weren't people ignoring danger, they were making calculated bets that the rewards of fertile land and marine resources outweighed the risks. The sobering lesson from these digital time capsules isn't that civilizations should avoid risky environments. Scans of the Nile Delta show how Egyptian cities flourished for millennia in a floodplain that could and did erase entire dynasties when the river shifted. Instead, the data suggests the most enduring societies weren't those immune to disaster, but those who factored catastrophe into their design. When researchers scanned the earthquake-resistant architecture of Peru's Chan Chan, they found walls built with deliberate flexibility, stones fitting together like puzzle pieces to sway without collapsing. At the same time, Indus Valley cities placed their granaries on raised platforms, visible in 3D models as elevated silhouettes above flood-prone streets. Perhaps the most humbling revelation comes from comparing ancient disasters with modern ones. LiDAR scans of the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami's impact on coastal ruins in Sri Lanka show waves stopping at the same stone barriers that protected cities 2,000 years prior, barriers later generations had removed for development. In California, ground-penetrating radar traces the San Andreas Fault's path directly beneath neighborhoods built where indigenous communities once marked the land as uninhabitable. The scans don't just document past collapses, they highlight choices we're still making today. These images force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. For all our technology, we still build on fault lines below sea level and in the shadow of volcanoes. The difference between ancient societies and ours isn't the scale of natural threats, but the scale of our exposure. When the next great quake or eruption comes, and the scans prove it will our cities leave behind digital footprints showing foresight or hubris? The answer may lie in whether we choose to read the warnings buried beneath our feet. The roads tell the saddest stories, not in words but in footprints. Across the ancient Southwest, LiDAR scans of ancestral Puebloan trails show paths worn deep into the rock by generations of travelers, then suddenly overgrown with undisturbed desert brush. These silent highways map an exodus. In places like Choco Canyon, 3D models reveal something haunting. Storage rooms packed with corn cobs left behind, their tiny size betraying years of poor harvests, while scans of nearby cliffs expose crude handholds where families scaled sheer rock faces to reach safer ground. It wasn't a single drought that emptied these cities. The data shows waves of departures over decades, each group clinging a little longer than the last until finally, the scans capture the moment when even the most stubborn holdouts walked away from stone towers that had stood for centuries. Half a world away, similar patterns emerge. Ground-penetrating radar along the Roman Empire's northern frontiers detects abandoned watchtowers with their signal fires still stacked neatly inside military outposts evacuated so hastily that personal items were left on sleeping pallets. The scans reveal roads built for legions suddenly clogged with civilian traffic, as if entire provinces were voting with their feet when the empire could no longer protect them. At Vindolanda near Hadrian's Wall, soil analysis shows where stable floors were repurposed for refugee camps, their trampled layers littered with handmade brooches from Germanic tribes and shattered Syrian glassware. This wasn't invasion. It was something subtler, a slow bleeding away of trust in the systems meant to hold society together. Perhaps the most poignant migrations are the ones we can almost hear. In the Indus Valley, 3D reconstructions of Gagga-Hakra River settlements show orderly neighborhoods becoming ghost towns, but not empty. The scans detect hearths moved indoors as security worsened, then smaller cooking pots as families shrank, until finally, just a few stubborn hearths glowed in the ruins. At the same time, LiDAR maps trace new trails leading southeast toward the Ganges, where soil scans reveal identical pottery styles emerging centuries later. These weren't random wanderings, they were calculated relocations with entire cultural knowledge carried in the minds of those who walked away. What makes these digital reconstructions so revealing is how they challenge old assumptions about collapse. Scans of Easter Island's coastal villages show canoe sheds abandoned generations before the famous statues fell, not because resources vanished, but because the islanders chose to leave while they still had the means. Similarly, in the Maya lowlands, laser surveys detect reforestation starting in some areas even as cities still thrived elsewhere, suggesting coordinated retreats rather than chaotic flights. The lesson hidden in these scans isn't just that societies fall apart. Sometimes they make the conscious choice to disband, to trade grandeur for survival, monuments for mobility. The haunting beauty of this data lies in its intimacy. At Turkey's Çatalhöyük, one of humanity's first cities, ground-penetrating radar exposes a final act of care before abandonment. House after house carefully filled with clean earth, their wall paintings plastered over as if putting memories to bed. Meanwhile, in the American Southwest, scans of a single Anasazi sandal left on a trail tell their own story. Its wear pattern shows a foot dragging slightly, perhaps from exhaustion or injury, but the path continues onward. These scans don't just record collapse, they capture resilience in motion, the moment when carrying on meant walking away from everything familiar toward something uncertain but necessary. And in that, they mirror choices being made in our own time by communities facing rising seas and withering droughts, proving that sometimes the end of one story is just the unrecorded beginning of another. These ancient scans aren't just windows to the past, they are mirrors reflecting our own vulnerabilities with startling clarity. Take climate change. The same sediment layers that show Maya reservoirs drying up now appear in satellite images of shrinking lakes worldwide. LiDAR maps of anchors over engineered canals parallel modern cities pumping groundwater faster than rains can replenish it. Even the Indus Valley's salt-poisoned fields find eerie echoes in today's agricultural heartlands, where irrigation leaves behind white crusts of mineral buildup. The difference: we're watching our warning signs in real time with tools those civilizations couldn't imagine. Inequality leaves equally visible scars across time. Ground-penetrating radar reveals how Roman elites walled themselves off as aqueducts failed, just as today's digital mapping tracks gated communities expanding during water shortages. The scans of Cahokia's slums, their cesspits seeping into drinking wells, could be overlaid onto modern megacity, informal settlements where infrastructure lags behind explosive growth. Perhaps most chilling are the 3D models of Mycenaean storehouses, their dwindling reserves meticulously recorded on clay tablets, while outside walls show scorch marks from food riots. When societies fracture along resource lines, the archaeology of collapse follows a predictable script, yet the most urgent lesson lies in how these civilizations responded or failed to mounting pressures. At Teotihuacan, scans show rulers doubling down on temple construction even as neighborhoods starved, a pattern repeating in today's vanity projects launched amid housing crises. Contrast that with the ancestral pueblones, whose trail maps reveal deliberate relocations to sustainable lands, a strategy mirrored by modern communities planning managed retreats from rising coastlines. The scans prove collapse isn't inevitable, it's the culmination of choices. When Khmer engineers kept digging deeper canals instead of adapting crops to drought, they left us a cautionary tale written in mud and laser light. What makes this technology revolutionary isn't just its ability to document the past, but to simulate futures. By feeding ancient collapse patterns into climate models, researchers have identified societal tipping points, like the deforestation threshold that doomed Easter Island's agriculture. These digital time machines allow us to stress test our systems. What happens to global trade if key ports flood like Ostia? How might inequality destabilize cities when resources tighten, as in Nineveh? The answers lie in algorithms trained on millennia of human experience. The hopeful twist comes from places that buck the trend. Scans of Petra's water channels show ingenious conservation during droughts, while 3D models of pre-Incan terraces reveal crop rotations that maintained fertility for centuries. These success stories share a common thread: flexibility. Unlike the rigid hierarchies preserved in Hittite palace scans, thriving cultures adjusted their social contracts along with their infrastructure. That adaptability is now quantifiable, offering blueprints for resilience written in stone and soil. Our greatest advantage over these lost civilizations isn't technology, it's hindsight. Where they saw isolated crises, we recognize patterns. When the Maya cleared forests, they couldn't know it would amplify droughts. But our LiDAR-equipped satellites trace those connections in vivid detail, linking Amazon deforestation to disrupted rainfall continents away. The scans gift us something priceless, the chance to learn from failures not our own. The real test isn't whether we'll decipher these ancient warnings, but whether we'll heed them before our own cities become someone else's cautionary tale. For decades, historians sketched the Maya as scattered farming communities ruled by priest kings in isolated temple cities, a vision now shattered by laser scans cutting through centuries of jungle growth. These high-tech surveys reveal urban landscapes so densely packed they rival modern metropolises, with raised highways connecting neighborhoods across 50 square miles or more. The old textbook image of simple maize cultivators living in harmony with the forest collapses under the weight of data showing industrial-scale limestone quarries, reservoirs supplying tens of thousands, and suburbs sprawling far beyond ceremonial centers. One particularly striking scan near Tikal uncovered a previously unknown district of specialized workshops, a proof of a complex economy where artisans mass-produced tools, jewelry, and ceremonial items for trade. This wasn't just a society supplemented by farming. It was an interconnected urban civilization operating at a scale that would have made contemporary medieval European cities look like villages. The revisions don't stop there. Ground-penetrating radar in the Maya lowlands exposed another misconception. Their famed collapse wasn't the uniform event we once imagined. Earlier theories painted it as a sudden catastrophe around 900 AD, but the scans show waves of abandonment spanning centuries, with some cities thriving long after others fell. At Karakol, 3D models reveal neighborhoods expanding even as Tikal's population shrank, while scans of coastal settlements like Chelum prove certain areas not only survived but reinvented themselves through maritime trade. This patchwork decline suggests no single cause, no invading army or apocalyptic drought could explain such varied fates. Instead, the data points to a mosaic of local crises where adaptable communities outlasted rigid ones. Perhaps no old theory crumbles harder under 3D scrutiny than the ecologically noble savage myth surrounding the Maya. Early archaeologists described them as gentle stewards of the rainforest, but LiDAR maps tell a different story. Vast areas completely deforested for urban expansion, hillsides terraced to the point of erosion, and reservoirs clogged with sediment from overworked fields. One sobering scan sequence captures centuries of environmental strain. First, carefully engineered canals feeding thriving farms, then layers showing those same channels choked with runoff from cleared land, and finally, the telltale signs of desperate attempts to dredge them before abandonment. The Maya didn't passively coexist with nature. They transformed it dramatically and paid the price when those transformations crossed irreversible thresholds. Even the role of warfare gets rewritten by this new evidence. Where earlier scholars saw ritualized battles between kings, scans of defensive walls and strategically placed fortifications reveal something closer to total war. At the site of El Zotz, LiDAR uncovered a previously invisible network of lookout towers and fire beacon platforms stretching between cities, an ancient early warning system against invasions. Other scans show how Maya engineers weaponized their own landscape, digging massive trenches and redirecting rivers to create moats around vulnerable settlements. The most chilling discovery came from a ground-penetrating radar survey at Witsna, where soil disturbances matched ancient accounts of burned cities, not just temples, but entire residential districts systematically torched during conflicts. What makes these technological corrections so vital isn't just setting the historical record straight. They reshape our understanding of how civilizations actually function and fail. The old theories often portrayed collapses as singular events caused by external forces. A volcano erupts, barbarians invade, the rains stop. But the scans expose a far more nuanced reality where internal choices, urban overexpansion, resource mismanagement, social rigidity determined who weathered crises and who didn't. When we see Maya cities adapting successfully for generations before finally succumbing, or satellite settlements learning from their predecessors' mistakes, it paints collapse not as destiny, but as the accumulated weight of countless small decisions. And that's a lesson written not in stone or parchment, but in the very shape of the land waiting centuries for the right tools to reveal its truth. Beneath the high-tech glow of digital archaeology lies a quiet controversy, one not about discovery, but about who gets to control the past once it's been scanned. When researchers create 3D models of ancient Maya temples or Indus Valley streets, they're not just capturing data, they're creating a new kind of cultural artifact, one that exists in the cloud rather than the soil. And that raises urgent questions. Who owns a digital twin of a sacred site? Should a reconstruction of looted artifacts be available to anyone with an internet connection, or only to communities whose ancestors built them? These aren't hypothetical debates. In 2019, a team scanning indigenous Australian rock art faced backlash when elders learned the data could be downloaded globally, effectively removing their ability to protect knowledge meant only for initiated members. The scans were deleted, but the dilemma remains. The tension often crystallizes around access versus preservation. On one hand, making scans public allows global researchers to collaborate, as seen when open-source models of Palmyra's ruins helped Syrian archaeologists document damage during wartime. Conversely, some Native American tribes have demanded exclusive rights to scans of ancestral sites, arguing that unrestricted access invites exploitation. The Zuni Pueblo's response is telling. They permit LiDAR surveys of their ancient villages, but the data stays locked in tribal archives, used solely for education and preservation. This approach, sometimes called digital repatriation, challenges Western notions that knowledge should be universally available, suggesting instead that some truths belong to specific descendants. Complicating matters further are commercial interests. When a tech company scanned Mexico's Teotihuacan pyramids in ultra-high resolution, they initially claimed copyright over the resulting models, a move that sparked outrage from Mexican officials. Similar battles have erupted over scans of Egyptian tombs used in video games without local consent. The underlying issue is stark. If a corporation can monetize digital reconstructions of public heritage sites, do they owe anything to the nations that steward the originals? Some countries are fighting back. Italy now requires permits for scanning artifacts, while Greece has sued auction houses selling 3D printed replicas of Parthenon marbles. Technology is outpacing the ethical frameworks meant to contain it. Facial recognition software can now reconstruct ancient faces from skull scans, but should it when living descendants might object? AI can restore faded murals digitally, potentially altering their original meaning. Even well-intentioned projects walk a fine line. When a university team recreated a destroyed Buddhist monument in Afghanistan virtually, some Afghan scholars praised the effort, while others called it cultural appropriation by outsiders. The scans themselves become contested ground, carrying all the political weight of the physical sites they represent. Yet within these conflicts lie glimpses of solutions. The Maori have pioneered a middle path, partnering with researchers to create digital archives of carved meeting houses, but encoding the files with traditional restrictions that mirror their oral transmission rules. In Canada, some First Nations use blockchain to track who accesses sacred site scans, embedding permissions into the data itself. Perhaps the most promising model comes from Egypt, where recent scans of Tutankhamun's tomb are jointly managed by the government and local communities, with revenue funding heritage projects in nearby villages. The debate isn't just about technology, it's about power. For centuries, archaeology meant outsiders extracting artifacts and interpreting cultures for the world. Now, 3D scanning offers a chance to rewrite that dynamic, putting control back in the hands of those closest to the past. But doing so requires acknowledging that digital preservation isn't neutral. Every scan is a choice: what to record, how to share it, and who gets to decide. As these tools grow more powerful, one truth becomes clear: preserving heritage isn't just about safeguarding objects. It's about respecting the living threads that still connect people to them. The future of uncovering lost civilizations isn't just about finding more ruins, it's about seeing them in ways we've never imagined. Right now, archaeologists are developing scanners that can peer deeper into the earth with higher resolution, mapping entire cities in days instead of decades. Picture this: drones equipped with next-generation LiDAR that can detect not just walls, but the faint chemical traces of ancient fires, decomposed organic material, even the footprints of long-vanished livestock pens. These advances will let us reconstruct societies in living color, right down to the layout of their market stalls and the wear patterns on their staircases. And the breakthroughs aren't limited to land. Underwater robots with sonar arrays are already revealing sunken ports and coastal settlements swallowed by rising seas, their streets preserved like time capsules beneath the waves. But the real revolution lies in what happens after the scans. Artificial intelligence is now being trained to spot patterns human eyes might miss, like subtle shifts in construction styles that hint at waves of migration, or the way trash pits move closer to homes during famines, signaling desperation. Researchers in Greece recently fed thousands of scans from Mycenaean citadels into machine learning algorithms, and the software detected a previously unnoticed trend. As collapse neared, new buildings were clustered near palaces, as if elites were pulling their circles tighter while the periphery frayed. These aren't just observations, they're early warning systems written in stone, teaching us how societies fracture under pressure. Upcoming projects promise even grander scales. The ArchAI initiative aims to scan every known archaeological site on Earth within 20 years, creating a global digital library of human settlement. Imagine comparing water management systems across dozens of civilizations with a click, or watching climate change's impact unfold side by side in 3D models of the Indus Valley, the Maya lowlands, and the Roman Empire. Meanwhile, quantum sensors in development could one day detect buried structures without any digging at all, using subtle variations in gravity to map ruins hidden under modern cities or dense rainforests. The most exciting possibilities lie in collaboration. Indigenous communities are partnering with scientists to scan ancestral lands, combining traditional knowledge with high-tech tools. In Australia, Aboriginal elders are using ground-penetrating radar to locate sacred sites obscured by colonial development, then overlaying oral histories onto the digital maps. This fusion of ancient memory and cutting-edge tech doesn't just recover lost places, it heals fractured connections to the past. Similarly, citizen science projects now let anyone analyze archaeological scans online, turning millions of curious minds into a global research force. When a teenager in Norway recently spotted an unusual pattern in Mesopotamian irrigation scans, It led experts to reevaluate how early cities managed drought. Yet with these opportunities come new responsibilities. As scanning becomes cheaper and more accessible, there's a race to protect vulnerable sites from looters using the same tools to pinpoint treasures. UNESCO new guidelines urge researchers to withhold precise coordinates of sensitive finds, while some nations are encrypting scan data to prevent exploitation. The ethical dilemmas grow more complex too. Should we digitally reconstruct culturally sensitive sites like West African burial mounds or Native American ceremonial centers, even if it's technically possible? The answers will shape not just what we discover, but how we honor the civilizations we study. What emerges from all this isn't just a clearer picture of collapse, but a living laboratory of human adaptation. As climate change reshapes our world, the scans offer case studies in resilience. How the ancestral Pueblones shifted crops during droughts, how the Khmer adjusted canal flows, how the Vikings abandoned Greenland when conditions became unsustainable. These aren't ancient history, they're survival manuals written in the language of soil and stone. The next decade of discovery won't just fill museums with artifacts. It might just help us rewrite the future. Imagine slipping on a headset and suddenly standing in the bustling marketplace of ancient Carthage, hearing merchants haggle in long-dead languages while the scent of spices and salt air fills the air around you. This isn't science fiction, it's the cutting edge of archaeology, where 3D scans are being transformed into fully interactive worlds. Museums from London to Tokyo are now partnering with researchers to build digital reconstructions so precise, you can trace your fingers along the grooves of a Maya stela or count the bricks in the Great Wall's forgotten sections. The British Museum's virtual exploration of Assyrian Nineveh lets visitors walk its 7.5-mile walls, peering into palaces that haven't stood for millennia. Meanwhile, the Smithsonian's Eternal Anchor experience uses climate data and architectural scans to simulate how sunlight filtered through temple corridors during solstices, a celestial alignment invisible to modern tourists in the crumbling ruins. But these projects do more than entertain. They're shattering barriers to access in ways physical artifacts never could. When Harvard's digital Giza team scanned every known object from the pyramids, they didn't just create a research tool. They built a portal where schoolchildren in Nairobi can examine Tutankhamun's golden mask closer than anyone could in Cairo's crowded museum. For people with mobility challenges, these virtual digs offer experiences once thought impossible, navigating Machu Picchu's steep terraces or crawling through Egypt's narrow tomb shafts without leaving home. Even more powerful are the collaborations with indigenous communities. In New Mexico, Pueblo elders worked with archaeologists to digitally reconstruct ancestral villages exactly as oral histories describe them, preserving traditions that written records often distorted. The magic lies in the details. Advanced scans capture more than just structures, they record textures, acoustics, even the play of shadows at different times of day. Rome's Reborn project used LiDAR data to simulate how sunlight illuminated the Colosseum's awning system during gladiator battles, while acoustic engineers mapped how chants would have echoed through Göbekli Tepe's circular chambers. These aren't speculative artists' impressions, they're scientifically grounded recreations where every pixel is backed by data. When you step into the virtual Roman Forum, the worn grooves on marble steps under your digital feet match millimeter-perfect scans of the actual wear patterns left by centuries of sandals. Public engagement takes on new meaning when audiences become active participants rather than passive observers. The University of California's Pompeii in 3D project lets users reassemble scanned fragments of frescoes like digital puzzles, contributing to real research. In Sweden, citizen scientists comb through crowd-sourced scans of Viking sites, flagging potential anomalies for professionals to investigate. This collaborative approach is rewriting discovery itself, like when gamers playing the Assassin's Creed Discovery Tour, built with archaeological scans, noticed architectural inconsistencies in a digital Athens marketplace that led scholars to reevaluate ancient blueprints. Yet these tools also raise profound questions about preservation. Digital reconstructions can freeze a moment forever, but should they? The debate intensifies around sensitive sites like Australia's Murujuga petroglyphs, where some Aboriginal groups oppose virtual access to sacred imagery. Other challenges are technical, ensuring these vast datasets remain accessible as file formats evolve, or preventing corporate platforms from monetizing cultural heritage. The Rosetta Stone's high-resolution scan being used in a candy commercial sparked rightful outrage, prompting institutions like the Louvre to establish strict digital rights guidelines. Perhaps the most transformative impact is how these experiences reshape our relationship with time. Standing virtually in Constantinople's Hagia Sophia as it appeared in 537 AD, surrounded by candles and chanting that haven't filled the space in centuries, does something textbooks cannot. It collapses distance between past and present. When you can look a scanned Neanderthal in the eye or hear the reconstructed voice of an Egyptian priest based on his mummy's vocal cords, history stops being abstract. These aren't just teaching tools, they're empathy machines reminding us that the people of the past were as complex and vivid as we are, their triumphs and failures echoing through digital reconstructions into our modern world. The real power of these 3D scans emerges when different scientific minds collide over the data. Picture a climatologist examining laser maps of Angkor Wat's canals alongside a hydrologist, suddenly realizing those precise engineering feats became death traps when monsoon patterns shifted. Or data scientists running algorithms across thousands of scanned artifacts from the Indus Valley, spotting subtle manufacturing changes that hint at supply chain collapses long before written records begin. These aren't isolated eureka moments, they're the fruits of a revolutionary approach where specialists who once worked in separate silos now share digital discoveries in real time. Take the recent breakthrough at Mesa Verde, when archaeologists scanning the cliff dwellings noticed peculiar burn patterns on roof beams. They called in forensic fire experts. Together, they reconstructed how ancestral Puebloan families likely retreated inward during attacks, burning their own outer rooms as defensive measures, a strategy visible in the scans as concentric charring rings. Meanwhile, botanists studying pollen samples from the same scans identified which crops failed first during droughts, while social scientists mapped how family units reconfigured in the tight spaces. What began as architectural documentation became a multidimensional portrait of survival under pressure. The synergy goes deeper than shared data. Climate modelers are now feeding ancient city scans into weather simulations, testing how urban layouts intensified or mitigated droughts. One stunning project reconstructed Teotihuacan's water systems digitally, then subjected them to 100-year rainfall projections. The results showed how their famed Street of the Dead actually functioned as a massive rainwater catchment during storms, an insight only possible when engineers and meteorologists pooled their expertise. Similarly, economists are applying trade network analysis to scanned harbor ruins, revealing how Mycenaean shipping routes frayed link by link before their palaces fell. Perhaps the most unexpected collaborations are with modern disaster response teams. Emergency planners now study scanned failures, like Hittite fortifications that collapsed during earthquakes due to poor mortar, to improve today's building codes. Public health experts analyze ancient sewer scans to understand disease spread patterns still relevant today. Even NASA has joined the effort, using algorithms developed for Mars terrain, mapping to detect subtle erosion patterns in scanned Maya farmlands that signal unsustainable practices. These interdisciplinary teams are rewriting history not as a linear narrative, but as a complex web of interacting systems. When a single scan of a Roman warehouse can tell a materials scientist about alloy quality, a botanist about grain storage, and a political historian about tax collection efficiency, the old boundaries between disciplines dissolve. The scans become Rosetta Stones for a new kind of scholarship, one where the fall of civilizations isn't attributed to single causes, but understood as the intersection of environmental pressures, technological limits, and human choices. And that may be their greatest revelation. Collapse was never simple, and neither are the solutions to avoiding it today. These digital windows into vanished worlds don't just show us where civilizations faltered, they reveal how. Every scan of a silt-clogged canal or a hastily rebuilt palace wall is a lesson etched in stone and soil, waiting centuries for us to decode. Take the Maya's sprawling agricultural terraces, visible in LiDAR scans as intricate grids across hillsides. At first glance, they're feats of engineering, but look closer and the data tells a darker story. Layers where topsoil washed away faster than it could regenerate, where farmers kept expanding uphill even as yields dwindled. It's a pattern we recognize today from satellite images of deforested Amazon basins or overworked wheat fields. The difference: we're watching our own version unfold in real time with tools those ancient farmers couldn't imagine. Social fractures emerge just as vividly in the scans. Ground-penetrating radar at Cahokia exposes elite compounds growing more fortified as malnutrition spread through surrounding slums, a dynamic mirrored in modern cities where gated communities rise alongside tent encampments. Even trade collapses leave digital fingerprints. 3D models of Roman ports show dockside warehouses emptying not from sudden catastrophe, but from a slow unraveling of trust as shipments grew unreliable. These aren't ancient problems solved by progress. They're human patterns repeating across millennia, visible now with startling clarity because we can see entire systems at once, from reservoirs to royal palaces, in ways archaeologists holding trowels never could. The true gift of this technology isn't just hindsight, it's foresight. When researchers feed scan data into climate models, they can simulate how Angkor's water network would fare under today's erratic monsoons, or test whether Teotihuacan's urban design could withstand modern heat waves. These aren't academic exercises. Peruvian engineers are already adapting ancient Inca terrace scans to combat Andean soil erosion, while Dutch urban planners studied digital reconstructions of Mesopotamian flood controls to safeguard low-lying cities. The past has become a testing ground for solutions, with buried cities offering case studies in both failure and resilience. Yet the most profound shift may be how these scans are changing our relationship with time itself. Holding a pottery shard connects you to a single moment, but walking through a 3D reconstruction of Caracol's market square, hearing the echo of virtual footsteps where vendors once haggled, collapses centuries into visceral immediacy. When you can trace the cracks in a civilization's foundations as clearly as faults in a modern dam, history stops being a distant warning. It becomes a mirror reflecting our own crossroads, the warming climate, the strained resources, the social divides. The question isn't whether we'll leave ruins for future scanners to discover, but what story those ruins will tell. Will they show stubborn repetition of past mistakes, or the bold adaptations that kept societies alive? The scans don't just give us answers, they hand us the responsibility to choose. If unraveling these ancient mysteries captivated you, join the conversation below. Which civilization's collapse resonates most with today's challenges? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest puzzles. The past has never been more alive or more urgent.